is a monumental act of war. After being kidnapped and flown to the U.S., President Nicolás Maduro has pled not guilty to spurious drug charges in New York City. Even as U.S. government documents admit that Venezuela is not a major drugs producer, and prosecutors concede that Maduro's supposed cartel of the Suns never even existed. The empire's mendacity knows no bound, and they will likely not stop there. Joining us to discuss Trump, Venezuela, and the U.S. empire is Diego Sequera. Diego is a journalist and academic based in Caracas, Venezuela. You can find his work in Spanish and English at investigative news website Mission Verdad. Diego, welcome to the show.
Hey, Mnar, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Diego, I know this must be quite a difficult time for people like yourself who are from Venezuela, watching your president, your elected president, being kidnapped by the U.S. empire, the very nation that has waged a maximum pressure campaign and so much propaganda and aggression against your independent country. And right now, Western corporate media is trying to justify and whitewash what Donald Trump has done to Nicolás Maduro and the Venezuelan people by, putting out the same messaging that they've been doing for such a long time, dictatorship, human rights abuses, and so forth, as if these drug charges were not really, don't have a solid base. And so, I want to start by talking to you about this and what has been your reaction and the reaction of the people in Venezuela.
So you get to grasp with the feeling that what was actually hit and who are the victims and what more time can be coined under the very malicious name of collateral damage, which explains something that I think is important. Getting back to your comment and your question is how this is the outcome of so many years of vilification, character assassination, obfuscation, and the creation of this dehumanization of us in particular and the president specifically, and society in general, in order to make this at some point more palatable for Western audiences or for Western institutions to, justify this kind of actions. Funny enough, it has been so blatant, as you said, that even, especially the liberal sphere, are now alarmed with what happened, without realizing how much it's also on them, precisely to enforce this kind of baseless, deformed ways and means of representing Maduro, President Maduro himself, the Bolivarian Revolution, and Venezuela overall. And I think this should be a lesson in that sense, because now you see people who were actually just weeks ago, or months, or years, doesn't matter. I mean, like I said, attacking Venezuela, condemning Venezuela, especially not understanding the complexities Venezuela was going through. And now suddenly you see them scared and alarmed. And I don't know how much coming into terms that this was also on them, precisely for not go beyond the usual talking points and the usual feel-good fear of knowledge, and with something that goes beyond that and is as brutal as it gets, which also proves how, one more time, the whole narrative just fell immediately about the drugs, about dictatorship and whatnot, and how basically resumes on a first level exclusively on what they already have been stating all this time, which is oil, of course, the oil resources, Venezuelan reserves as a form of a very important resource, a key resource for leverage worldwide within the energy market, and as a tool for go further in other areas as well. not only focusing on what's basically regional change, but that according to that rationale, it seems it just starts with Venezuela, but it's going to go further. And but also, like many people have been saying, and I think it really makes sense, for example, that this way, like relying on Venezuelan reserves in order to do something in Iran in the case of the closing of the Hormuz Strait, for example, as a way to not get that harmed in a hypothetical situation in which something happens there. So this also, in a way, brings closer and justifies and confirms this nonlinear contact line between the countries that are actually resisting and are betting on a different kind of world order, and the urgency of the United States to do something before decline finishes taking it all over and bring them, well, to different stages of collapse themselves.
And right now, we are being bombarded also with AI footage that is being shared by, MAGA influencers like Nick Shirley and even Elon Musk himself. They're sharing fake AI videos of Venezuelans supposedly celebrating their president being kidnapped and abducted by President Trump, and they're crying. I mean, all these are fake videos, of course. But what's so interesting, Diego, is that even though they've been verified as fake AI videos, Grok, the AI, machine inside of X, says that they're real and they're being shared. And so we're seeing this really new way of manufacturing consent for this regime change. But the reality on the ground, I'm curious. I mean, I think a lot of people are curious to know, are people celebrating Maduro's kidnapping on the ground in Venezuela, or are there mass protests like I'm seeing to show that people are upset and they're demanding their president be returned to Venezuela? Can you tell us about the reactions on the ground and the protests?
Of course. Mind you, one thing. If they're inside Venezuela, it's definitely an AI in this case. If it's outside Venezuela, it is real. It is parts of the diaspora in United States and Spain and other places. And I mean, they're saying such cynical stuff like this is the price that needs to be paid. But of course, it's easy when you're outside. There's a saying here that a stab doesn't hurt another body. And this is one of those cases. Precisely because of how shameful this is. They are also on social media. I was able to finally, go through scroll some social media last night when I got here about the different, very common non-politicized Venezuelans' reactions. People that don't necessarily support Nicolás Maduro and are addressing all these diaspora types, be it artists, influencers, or whatever, and just calling them out for what they are, and telling them, come over and endure this with us if you're that tough and if you're gonna do that hard talk. So that's one level to it. Then you got, yes, they are currently, today it's another day, that they are rallying throughout the country. I mean, to different extents. And then you got the other, and also a lot of mourning. And then you got the people who are basically calm. But what I'm trying to say here is that, yeah, there are no street celebrations, celebrating precisely Nicolás Maduro's kidnapping. That's not happening inside Venezuela. And I think that's important to take into account up to this point. Also, which is, I think it's normal that happens, now we're starting to see more footage of victims. People that didn't die, but their homes got destroyed, got wrecked, just because they are now collateral damage, people who died, civilians that died in La Guaira, in Caracas, because of the targets they chose and the impact that it had. For example, they attacked in La Guaira, which is, as you know, it's a coastal city. It's a coastal city next to Caracas, and where one of, not the main port, but one of the most important port, the port of Caracas, was also bombed. They bombed a medicine storage facility for kidney treatment, for dialysis, for example. And they also bombed the math center of the Venezuelan Institute for Scientific Studies. So that also tells you that this is all the surgical BS. One more time, it's not the case. Of course, yes, at this point, it's not that, to be accurate, it's not that it's that's indiscriminate as other. It's not Baghdad 2003 in that sense, but it has had an impact, and there are very many reactions in the street, in conversation, and on social media, precisely condemning this and addressing the fact that this is not what we want. And this goes one more time. I always have to stress this because people think this is just a Chavista thing, and it's not. And it's not at any level. I mean, but many Venezuelans just basically never agreed with this kind of pressure, this kind of U.S. meddling, and this kind of you know ways and means to solve the situation. And funny enough, not even if they were supporters of Maria Corina Machado or those factions, not even them are being pleased. The U.S. has, they said, they basically said, we are now running the show, not them. And we rather run the show according to this unstable moment in which we're at with the Chavista government. So that's a de facto acknowledgement of where the power, the center of gravity still is. And how much weight does the actual extremist U.S. supported and funded opposition actually stand? Because there's also opposition now within parliament. At least yesterday they also condemned the attacks, but it's a moderate legal opposition, the one that acknowledges Venezuela's government, Venezuela's constitution, and Venezuela's political processes. So this proves even further that Chavismo is still an hegemony here, not only on an institutional level, especially on a parliament that started just 2 days ago with a overwhelming majority of seats taken by Chavismo, by the PSUV or allied parties. So indirectly, this confirms the opposite of everything they have been slandered about Venezuela.
Well, and I'm really curious to know, I mean, the Trump administration and Trump himself have said, we are now in control of the oil. We are now in control of Venezuela. And I mean, like you just said, you guys are having parliamentary meetings. People are protesting on the streets, demanding their president be, brought back home. And so when Trump says that he's in charge and they've taken over the oil and he's ready to seize 30 to 50 million barrels and to sell that and to use that money, he's going to be in charge of that money, he said, those profits and those sales. I mean, what is going on here? Like, can he actually, and can the U.S. be actually in charge right now? And how would they even do that?
Yeah, I mean, nothing that happens with oil trade is something that's going inside Venezuela properly right now. So this is something that goes beyond Venezuela's borders. And first of all, especially in markets that were already closed and withheld from Venezuelan oil participation over a decade anyway. So in that sense, it has a lot of noise to it. And in another sense, this actually helps to ease the deposits of oil, of Venezuelan oil production in a way. I mean, on a very specific and technical aspect. And currently, yes, that's what we're seeing. And I think this is a situation that basically has to be managed, and it has to be wisely managed from Venezuela. I don't have details. I don't have exact details on how this actually working right now, other than the statement that we've seen, and other than from my own personal conclusions that you have to manage, yes, the situation in a way smart enough. This is not, and when I say smart enough, I'm thinking about what other ways have to be implemented to face an overwhelming military superpower on mad dog mode, and not a very smart one, and especially because this is really a short-term thing. I was telling Katie Helper yesterday, this is a sugar high win. This is all short-term. According to many Western media, they say there's no actual plan of what they're actually going to do, the United States, regarding Venezuela. And regardless, of course, of what they've been saying, but if you see there's a lot of gibberish going on. You saw Stephen Miller unable to say anything coherent to Jake Tapper, for example. So this is descriptive of I don't know if it is a level of improvisation, relying, of course, on the tools they already have in hand. I don't know if it's method within the madness. I don't know if it's just chaos and just a day by day thing. We have to see more. We have to see the coming days how many of these things actually take shape. But for one, I do believe that in order to face this kind of overwhelming moments, you have to play, and we're able to play it smarter than they do.
And one of the major profiteers of the seizure of Venezuela's oil is going to be a pro-Zionist mega donor who's donated to Trump and to many pro-Israel causes and think tanks that have been promoting regime change inside of Venezuela. And his name is Paul Singer. He just bought Citgo. Like, he just bought Citgo. So talk to me more about Citgo and Paul Singer and how they plan to seize and profit off of Venezuela's oil.
Well, Singer is famous in this side of the world for being one of the managers of vulture funds. They did fire sales purchases of many assets in Argentina back in the day and trying to buy the debt and extort Argentina during the Cristina Kirchner's years. I mean, this is the kind of economic hitman that you're going to find. But mind you, something that is very important here, and it's not so obvious yet, and you already described part of the character, but I don't know if you're aware how close he is to Marco Rubio. And he has been close to Marco Rubio for years. He's one of the biggest funders of his PACs, just like ExxonMobil is. So this is something I've also repeated, but I think it has to be repeated one more time. When Trump and Wright or whoever deals with the energy markets talks about oil companies, for me, basically translating to one of them, which is ExxonMobil, the only one that didn't got any kind of agreement, compensation, or terms or accept the terms of Venezuela back in 2007, and who left the country and sued Venezuela on international courts. And by the way, I don't know if you are aware that one of the lawyers of ExxonMobil in Venezuela was Carlos Vecchio. Carlos Vecchio, as you know, was the fake U.S. and Venezuela ambassador from the fake Venezuelan imaginary government of Juan Guaido back in the day. So if you actually go further into detail, you see Exxon a lot appearing, especially because, for example, up to this point, at least up to last week before the attacks, Chevron was operating in Venezuela. It was operating under licenses of the USG and of Treasury, of OFAC. And they were working with Venezuela. They have been in Venezuela for 100 years. I mean, so they didn't stop all these days. So what does that tells us? From my point of view, I think we have to take into account and realize how big ExxonMobil's stakes and participation is inside this. Besides, of course, Singer, which I'll jump back to that in a minute. But put yourself in the place of ExxonMobil that already is extracting illegally oil from offshore wells in disputed waters between Venezuela and Guyana. And actually unrestricted, unchecked, frantically, and basically controlling each and every nook and cranny of Guyana. So just put yourself in their mind for a moment and think about having all these large reserves of light crude from offshore Venezuela's shores, because this is El Esequibo, and also Venezuela's largest reserves in the Orinoco Belt. And then walk back to Marco Rubio, one of the helping hands of AIPAC inside the US government, according to an AIPAC official. So all this comes, falls into place quite easily, especially when Israel, just like Exxon, had they wanted to settle some accounts with Venezuela from a long time ago. And yeah, and Israel by itself doesn't have such much of a vocal participation that that you can see, but boy, they're there, and boy, they have reason, especially for with a country that actually has no diplomatic relationship with the entity since 2009 during Operation Cast Lead. Up to this point, people forget about this. I mean, and it's commendable that many countries this last 2 years also joined the lawsuit by South Africa in in the IC in the International Court. But at the same time, we already did it more than a decade ago. You could have done it. I mean, it's a matter of will. If you actually are going to do something to the extent you're able to support Palestine, so that's, of course, that's also part of the interest and the procedures. All the AI and all this, it's of course run by Uber Zionists, and they also had a role here. I mean, it's hard not to imagine that one more time, at least in part, of the new way of war slash political economy that stems from Gaza wasn't operating here, you know, especially for a section of this new cloud robber barons, which really need to rely on cheap energy to make their venues actually viable in a midterm thing. So yes, all of this is crossed together, and Singer, it's a very descriptive crossing point of all of this, because it touches, like you already see, it touches the Zionist. It also established contacts with with Marco Rubio, with vulture funds, with the kind of, you know, the kind of buccaneering finance kind of things, and yes, and also his own interests here. So that I mean, I think that's a very good pick to pin up a lot of factors and actors that are also around the current moment against Venezuela.
And Venezuela has historically, through the Chavez administration, put Palestine as a national cause. Chavez even formed an alliance with former Iranian President Ahmadinejad to say that Venezuela is part of the axis of resistance, and has said that, all of Venezuela is Palestine and all of Palestine is Venezuela. Like, we are brothers and sisters in the same struggle. And I don't think people realize how much this was a thorn in Israel's back. And so for decades, Israel has written about and has spoken about how not only does Iran need to be overthrown, the government of Iran needs to be overthrown, but also the Venezuelan government needs to be overthrown for its support for Palestine, for its alliance with Iran, which is another sanctioned country. And so talk to me more about this and how Israel, apart from the pro-Zionist actors, may have played a role in the kidnapping of Maduro.
Yeah, I have no exact knowledge of something directly, but I think one of the things that explains this is basically because I think they have been, not only now, but all these years, they have been playing more in stealth mode regarding Venezuela, but they always pop up at some point. I don't know if you remember, this was now 9 years ago, here in Venezuela in 2017, there was this color-coded unconventional warfare kind of demonstration that were extremely violent, far more violent than the ones from 2014, in which even stars of David appeared painted in the streets, and yeah, even in the highway in southeastern Caracas, for example. And they people who were detained and interrogated also admitted to this. And then many other, I remember one of the numerous plots to kill Maduro, to overthrow the government, and so on, had to mention, this is the son of a general who was involved in this, mentioned, and they were actually infighting between them, and saying, I have the contact, I'm the one with the Israeli contacts here, so you have to listen to me, what I'm going to do. And this actually was one of the strings that at some point ended up in the previous operations before Operation Gideon, back in 2020, May. So this actually shows that in some ways or others they're there. And especially also you have the logistics, you have the AI, you have the SIGINT, you have all those resources that are actually ran by people. If they're not embedded, they're outside but close to Unit 82,000, So in that sense, it is clear that they have a take, but they're playing second line here, from my point of view. And it pops up on different ways. I think everyone saw Maria Corina Machado calling. Recently, our Nobel Peace uh, Nobel Peace Prize laureate Maria Corina Machado calling Netanyahu after she won the prize, and talking to him and supporting his quote unquote strong commitment in Gaza and so on, and how in 2018, her party, which is not, by the way, a legally registered party, Vente Venezuela, actually sent a communication to the Likud and directed to Netanyahu, asking for political and military support in the efforts of bringing freedom into Venezuela. And also in 2024, before the presidential elections, Maria Corina Machado gave a interview to one of the Israeli TV channels. I don't remember which, but she said quite clearly that when we win, we're going to resume relations with Israel, and Venezuela will move its embassy to Jerusalem under the frame of the Abraham Accords. But if you also want to see how candid and how explicit on the other side of things Israel is playing in the region, just go and see Argentina. And just go see the now looming ISAC Accords. That basically it's like a low-tier replica of the Abraham Accords that has been already subscribed by Argentina, Costa Rica, Panama, and if I'm not mistaken, the new Bolivia. In which basically, yeah, it's a replica, and it focuses on what matters and the most for the current Zionist regime, which is the narrative, which is the means of to control the speech, the freedom of speech, of course. Now, and then of course they call it the fight against anti-Semitism, as you extensively know. But to bring all that chapter into Latin America. So at the current moment, other than, I don't know, some congratulations and that kind of stuff, and some Freudian slips from some U.S. officials and an executive. I remember there was this interview, this guy saying how much good this is going to bring to the, and he says to Israel, and then he corrects, to the United States. I mean, that kind of Freudian slip also confirms how deep this goes and how much active he is. And it has been a long while. This has been a long while. I mean, I remember, yeah, something like 6 years, 7 years ago, some declassified files prove that, for example, Israel had an important role in communications between inside the whole structure of the Condor operation, and they were based in Panama. It was like a hub for communications between all this military and secret services from the Southern Cone and other places in order to help the effort of disappearing and exterminating people. So there you go. I mean, it's not as obvious as in, of course, in Western Asia, but of course, but definitely they're there, and they're doing what they are good at in that sense. And we'll have to wait and see. And I'm sure that we won't take too long to see more evidence of their participation during, I mean, before and during the recent events.
Thank you for explaining that. I want to talk more about the sham court case that's happening right now, this court hearing against President Maduro in New York City. It's so horrible to have seen all of those images and video of our corporate mainstream media from CNN to Fox News showing how Maduro was being paraded in the streets of New York. As if like they had caught this prize, right? And they're like showing him off, and you can hear people in the streets yelling, USA, USA. It was so disgusting. And to top all of this off, the star witness in the DOJ's drug trafficking court hearing against Maduro is actually a U.S. asset. His name is Hugo Carvajal. He defected and colluded with the Bush administration during the Chavez government. Tell us more about his history and why this is problematic for this case that the DOJ's key witness is a U.S. asset.
Yeah, I would like to address the first part of your question, which was the Roman parading of Nicolás Maduro and Celia Flores, the first lady, of course, who was wounded, as was also clear to see for anyone who wanted to. And how actually there was, I think it's a very important symbolic defeat there for the United States because of how he actually, first, the opportunity he had in front of cameras and what he did. First of all, just saying good night and smiling and just keeping it up, looking straight to the world, and also sending us this sign. I don't know if you realize, but he did this. He was in handcuffed, and he did just like this. He touched his hands and did the V sign, basically saying in Spanish, "Nosotros venceremos. We will prevail." So that has become now a symbol for us. And also, if you look at the takes of his presence in court and the way he behaved there and what he said and how he was, standing firm, that made a strong impression on all the correspondents who were inside the court that day, a couple of days ago. So in that part, I think that's important. Now, regarding Hugo El Pollo Carvajal, who was a former military intelligence chief for Chavez, and then also were colluded to an extent with Tarek El Aissami, one of the traitors of the project of the revolution, who actually had very high-profile positions, that was basically conspiring and was leading one of the biggest frauds in the oil field and others in our history, which was devastating at the moment in the sense of how, to the extent of how treasonous it was. And Hugo Carvajal was part of that scheme. And and I even have to think about this follows a pattern that wasn't that successful back then, and it's not being successful now either, if you ask me. Because yes, they're trying to turn me into a star witness, but this is also a coerced witness, something who was actually asking for benefits in order to reduce his own sentence. So he's actually declaring under duress, regardless of how willful he is to lie and deceive. But he has his own fate at play here. And if he doesn't play ball, it will be far worse for him. So he's going to say anything the U.S. wants them to say. And as you already saw the indictment, basically there's no mention of fentanyl, and they just, like the media has been covering, the whole Cartel de los Soles thing was dropped. So this proves how flimsy and how opportunistic and how fake the whole drug thing was, and how it was used as a procedure. We were warning this a lot before January the 3rd, in which they the whole thing about calling our president and the government narco terrorist and a narco state, and leading this the fake Cartel de los Soles, the Cartel of the Suns, which is a CIA creation of the 90s. It's mostly a procedural thing. You had, of course, the narrative to further the criminalization and the character assassination of Nicolás Maduro, the first lady, the government, the society, and the country as a whole. But it was also a convenient way to just say this is not a military operation, this is not a state declaring war to another state, this is police work, this is domestic security kind of operations. This has nothing to do with dictatorship or freedom. This is only about about a criminal and a criminal procedure in this sense. And they've been calling it even a police operation. It's far more easier legally and institutionally to do it this way, than going through the whole massive construct that was the Iraq 2003 WMDs. This was a highway for this. And throughout the whole process, not showing the goods, not showing evidence, and actually getting pushback even from their own institutions, like the top judicial authority inside the Pentagon acknowledging these were war crimes, for example. So it proves one more time that this is just lawfare, and it's even sloppier than that, Mnar, if you ask me. It's even sloppier. They just don't care anymore. This is never a matter of truth. Yeah, go on.
Well, no, I was just going to say, I mean, if the Trump administration really cared about drug trafficking, I mean, the CIA itself, just the CIA, is one of the largest narco terrorists in the world, responsible for trafficking so many different drugs. I mean, look at the war in Afghanistan. It was U.S. troops guarding the poppy seeds. We can't forget those images. Exactly. And that list, of course...
U.S. troops and CIA contractors.
Yeah, it was the CIA. Exactly. And of course, we can't forget that, at this point, the mask is off. Trump just pulled that mask off. And we're talking about drug trafficking and so on, but he has said, this is about oil. We're going there to take the oil. We're there to take over the vast mineral wealth. This is the Monroe Doctrine and now the Monroe Doctrine to make sure that the Western Hemisphere in its entirety is in U.S. control. I mean, this could very much be a cover-up, of course, from Trump's role in the Epstein files. He was mentioned over 600 times and implicated in the rape and murder of young girls. It's really disturbing stuff. So not only are we ruled by criminals, but we're ruled by pedophiles as well. And we're just given this show. I mean, like you said, it's the U.S. is having a sugar high right now. And they're putting up a big show of strength, parading Maduro in the streets, putting him on trial, kidnapping him with Apache helicopters, and, threatening to take over the oil industry. What has just happened is a representation of U.S. imperialism. It never died. And if anybody ever thought that the U.S. cared about human rights, let this be yet another reminder in case you're confused. I don't know how you can be confused at this point. Yeah. Considering we just watched a genocide in Gaza, and it was presided over by the Trump administration, the Biden administration, by U.S. imperialism, funded and armed. So there's no question at this point that the U.S. does not give a damn about human rights. Otherwise, Netanyahu right now would be on trial, right? He would have been captured. He would have been the first person that the United States would have kidnapped. And so this is obviously a sham case, but it's not the first time we've seen stuff like this before. But before we go into other examples of the U.S. kidnapping other state leaders, Delcy Rodriguez, who's the vice president in the government, has now been sworn in as the interim president of Venezuela. And so what is that going to look like, considering she has openly stated and invited the United States for dialogue? What can we take from that?
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah.
No, sure. But first, she didn't say anything new. This has been government position ever since. Venezuela will always be available and willful to talk as equals, as normal actors with the United States, just like any other country in the world. This is not about privilege relationship. This is about a conversation among states, among rational states. That's the premise in which this is based. And that has been, Nicolás Maduro was saying the same thing probably 1-2 weeks before all of this. And mind you that at least until 2013, 14, the U.S. was one of the main buyers of Venezuelan oil. There's a whole refining circuit in southern U.S. that relies on Venezuelan's heavy crude, that has suffered a lot, by the way, but because of all this militancy of people who are actually opposing ideology to energy markets. But at the same time, she also said the other part of this, which is as important, because that's official. There's nothing new there. But she also said, I am the interim president, and I'm waiting, and we are all waiting for the return of the legitimate elected president of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, which is Nicolás Maduro, and the First Lady, Cilia Flores.
And do you think, Diego, that the United States will return Maduro? What do you think lies ahead for Nicolás Maduro now that he's in captivity by the U.S. government?
Yeah, it's really hard to tell at this point, and it's too soon, for at least for me, to make a more informed analysis or opinion about this. I don't rule that out. I don't know how or when, but I don't rule that out necessarily up to this point. It depends what happens next. Depends what happens in the next audience, which is in March the 17th. Depends on a lot of things that are going on right now, but I don't think it's impossible. Venezuela was able to bring back, for example, Alex Saab, which also seemed impossible back then. Alex Saab, as you know, now he's a Minister of Industries, and he was an entrepreneur and who had a diplomatic support for bringing food into Venezuela from other places. And this was his crime. A very different kind of leader from some people who are used to, the usual 20th century kind of revolutionary. But a leader, nevertheless, a hero, nevertheless, in that sense. Someone who puts his life in the line to bring food to Venezuela in order not to allow, a famine, or even a worse, for what it was back then, bringing imported food from throughout the world and circumventing sanctions. So I don't think it's impossible. I think that could happen at some point, but I don't have any valuable point in which to rely other than this kind of precedents. He has also a very good lawyer in this case who was able to manage to finally release Assange, because that's his lawyer, Pollack. Jeffrey Pollack, I think is his name. That's Maduro's lawyer here.
Yeah.
And I think that's also significant. And so it's a matter of waiting and see. But jumping back to the other question, where you asked how would that look like with our current interim president, Delcy Rodriguez. First, you have to take into account that this was ruled by the Supreme Court based on 2 articles of our own constitution. So it's a legally it's a solid move, and it's important, and it's based on our domestic laws. And if you see the cabinet, nothing has changed either. And this happens because timing, it's never easy to hide. A couple of days before the new National Assembly was installed. So this tells you how they wanted to disrupt state function and administrative continuity, and they weren't able to achieve that. And now they have to rely on this government because they know that any other, it's incapable to keep stability. I mean, this is uncharted waters, Mnar, in many ways, and this is one of them. But it shows you how no state collapse means a lot in this kind of situation, and describes a lot the situation.
Yeah, and I was going to actually bring up Alex Saab. I mean, the fact that he was an ambassador to bring aid and food, and he was even on his way from getting aid when he was kidnapped by the U.S. government. And he was put on trial in U.S. courts, and he was, in fact, let go and freed and brought back to Venezuela. And so it definitely, we're living in interesting times. I think that the president is a little bit different because of just how much the United States has been trying to take over the oil and mineral wealth of Venezuela. Then again, we have examples of, Hugo Chavez. There was a coup and he was kidnapped. I don't think he made it all the way to the United States, but it was the will of the people of Venezuela and them demanding that their president be returned, that Hugo Chavez, they actually ended up overthrowing the coup government, the people and the military. And then...
Yeah, it was a counter coup.
A counter coup. And then, he was returned. He was returned to Venezuela. So I really think, again, it really signifies just the power of the people. And, it's so horrible what they've said about Maduro being a dictator, because I don't know of any other dictator that would be handing out rifles to the people of their country. He armed his country to the T. Whereas here in the United States, the Second Amendment is being disarmed, and people could argue that that's a form of, authoritarianism. And I'm not one to support, guns or anything like that, but it is our Second Amendment right. And the people of Venezuela are being armed. They're not having their guns taken away. They're being armed. That's how much trust there is between Maduro and the people.
Yeah, and also part of the charges against Maduro, it's having guns at his home, having weapons. Yeah. That's part of the indictment based on a 1934 law. I mean, a domestic U.S. law that has nothing to do with Venezuelan legal system at all. So yeah, I mean, it is true.
Yeah. Well,
like I said, I mean, it's go on. Sorry.
No. I was just gonna, we're gonna try to wrap it up now, but I want to talk about, January 3rd marks a very historic day in U.S. history, because that was the day that Nicolás Maduro was kidnapped. January 3rd in 2020 was also the date that the United States, under the Trump administration, carried out an assassination against Qasem Soleimani. And also on January 3rd, 36 years ago to the day, that the U.S. abducted sitting Panamanian President Manuel Noriega, also on drug charges. So it seems like there's something going on with this date where the United States, they celebrate New Year's with a new war plan. And so how do you think this...
Go on.
No, I was just going to say, how do you think this signals a new era with Latin American countries, with the U.S.? I mean, the U.S. has openly now, the Trump administration has said, oh, Cuba, you're next. Nicaragua, you're next. Colombia, you're next. Do you think that will actually happen? Or what's your response to this?
It was already happening during the first stage of what we could call in hindsight now the first stage of this aggression. Striking the speedboats, the fishermen boats in some cases, near our shores and throughout the southern Caribbean basin. Many victims were Colombians and Trinidadians, not only Venezuelans. So it is already happening in that sense. And this fits into the Trump corollary of the national security strategy that was released in early December of last year. And you have to also pair this up with how they are also engaging with other countries. If it is the case of Argentina, for example, they offered a massive bailout to Milei that actually allowed him to win Congress back then. Then you got the case, for example, of Honduras, the way it was basically also the Truth Social post uh, threatening in Honduras that actually, tipped the balance and allowed also and protected a fraud that was an electoral fraud that was going on, allowing for the opposing candidate of the Libre Party to actually reach office. The same moment, by the way, Mnar, that they released Juan Orlando Hernandez, as you know. Former President Juan Orlando Hernandez was convicted for like 45 years for being guilty of pushing, along with his brother, 400 tons of cocaine into the United States. There is footage of him saying, "We're going to stuff the U.S. population's noses up to," it was allowed a bad word there, and also you see Marco Rubio involved in all of this, including the lobby effort, the lobby agency that actually pushed for Trump to talk about Juan Orlando Hernandez in the first place. Juan Orlando Hernandez, who actually shaped Honduras as a narco state, in a full-fledged narco state, just like Ecuador is now one. And also, it's so surprising to see how close Daniel Noboa, the current narco president of Ecuador, is so close, extremely close to Marco Rubio. So this tells you a lot, and we all know about Marco Rubio and Hector Sicilia's early days in Florida, and we all know also about Miami being a narco city in and of itself. So this is quite descriptive. I mean, a friend of mine said that if actually Venezuela, and this is the main difference with Noriega, if Venezuela was a narco state, it would have been a U.S. partner, not a U.S. enemy.
That's a very, very accurate statement, and I think many people would agree with that.
Yeah.
And
but this shows you what they want for the region, in the sense that it's not only about destroying and threatening and trying to impose this kind of viceroyal thing going on here in Venezuela, but also shows you which are their actual preferences in the vassal governments in other countries, the friendly governments in other countries. They're a different nature now, Mnar. This is even worse than the ones from 2015, who were actually, neoliberal nutcases, not so bright bulbs that actually did a lot of harm to their own societies and then lost power. These are actually turbocharged vassals, far more dumb and crazy, and able to do whatever, or dirty, in the case of Novoa, and able to do whatever the U.S. wants them to do.
Yeah.
In spite of anything, in spite of how harmful it could be to their own countries, onto the societies they are supposed to govern and protect. So this tells you a lot of what's in store for the region. How does the Trump corollary of the Monroe Doctrine now looks like? But also it shows you how desperate this is. It shows you how this is within the decline. It shows you how these are not precisely manifestations of strength. They're actually demonstration of desperation, because all of this, you were already mentioned a lot of the resource factor. This all amounts to keeping the petrodollar alive.
Yeah.
In a very bad moment.
Well, and that's what I was going to say, is if we can conclude on any sort of note about this, is that, it's not just about resources, of course, it's about U.S. hegemony and keeping the U.S. dollar alive, since right now, with the rise of BRICS, the rise of China, the rise of the global South, and resistance to U.S. Hegemony, the United States is trying to basically get control of the situation, and it looks desperate. When a big bully, like when you think about like a bully, the way they they act, they don't get this aggressive and this crazy unless they get extremely desperate and they're kind of on their last whim of what they're capable of. So it's an unfortunate turn of events that we've seen under the Trump administration. But I always say, like, you know, the Republicans and specifically Trump, this is like the empire without its clothes on. The mask is off. This is the true intentions and what the United States has always wanted. And he's there to fulfill those ambitions. And I think that, you know, with the genocide in Gaza, what we've really learned and people around the world have learned is that pro-Zionist actors are there pushing the U.S. to fulfill these war ambitions. So it's, you know, they've become like vessels of each other, where they're pushing the same agenda. So, Diego,
absolutely.
Diego, we are out of time, but it's been such a pleasure to have you here to learn, you know, from a Venezuelan on the ground who can give us the perspective of Venezuelans in Venezuela about what has happened with the abduction and kidnapping of their president, Nicolás Maduro. And of course, we don't know what's going to happen next. We don't know if the U.S. is going to send more boots on the ground in Venezuela, how exactly they're going to take over the oil industry or the government. We have, you know, yet to see what this is going to look like. And so hopefully we'll continue this conversation. But we thank you, and everyone who's watching can find more of Diego's work at Mission Verdad. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mnar. This is not over. That's the last thing I'm going to say. This is just the first act.